Okay, we spent many months and months drumming up ideas from all corners of our state. Wep Brown traveled with me around Montana. I've had several sessions around the state leading up to the summit here, asking people, what should we bring up at the summit? What do we need to talk about? This is your summit. It's nobody else's, it's yours. You tell us what you want to have, what speakers you want to have, what you want. And clearly one of the responses we got very frequently is airline service. A lot of Montanans, a lot of us think there should be more flights and they should not cost so much. And it's critical, better airline service is critical to the economic development of our state. One of the impediments to growth, I think, in Montana slightly has been transportation. We're not on a major hub, we're not a seaport, we're not a state which is right on the main line, which is we're kind of up there in Northwest next to Canada up there. And a lot of folks over on the East Coast, they're not sure where Montana is. Sometimes I'll meet somebody in the East Coast and say, where are you from? And I say, well, I'm from Montana. And I'll meet that same person about, I don't know, half a year later. It's, oh, Max, how's Wyoming? You've all experienced it. You know, they tend to lump us together out there. Don't really know what's going on. And I keep finding it's not discouraging, but it's a challenge we have to keep working on. The impression of Montana still is not what we know our state to be. Namely, a lot of folks don't know all that we have here, don't know the potential we have here, kind of see us as a great place to go visit, and friends and relatives go. You know, our great statement about Montana, we're 9 months of winter and 3 months of friends and relatives. And our goal here is to kind of turn that around. So it's 12 months for friends and relatives, and also a great place to visit and to do business. Well, I invited our next guest, Delta Airlines CEO Richard Anderson, to come and talk to us for that very reason. It's how do we get better connections? It's not just Delta, it's all airlines. Delta provides about 50 flights to and from our state, and tourism clearly is a key bedrock of our state. Tourism brings in about $3.3 billion to Montana. It's about 43,000 jobs. Joining Richard Anderson is going to be a top Delta executive, Eric Phillips. Eric is a Lewistown native. Boy, Central Montana knows what air service means. He's a Carroll College graduate, and I'd like you all just join me in welcoming both Richard Anderson and Eric Phillips. Thank you very much.
A lot of people from all over the world love to come into Montana to go to the parks, to spend their time outdoors.
You have access to national parks and world-class rivers and hiking and skiing that is beyond belief.
It's extremely important that we have good air service, certainly for the tourism aspect. But it's not just tourism, it's business too.
Delta provides that access through multiple hubs, Atlanta, Minneapolis, Salt Lake, and soon to be LA.
I'm still able to do what I do for work because of Delta enabling me to get from point A to point B. You have the luxury of getting to know the passengers that live in your community.
Delta is very much involved in local communities around the world and encourages our employees to be involved.
Our mission is youth development, healthy living, and social responsibility.
We're looking to also line them up with the other social services in our community that can get them back on the right and stable path.
So it's not like we heal the traumatic brain injury or we heal the incredible ache and pain of a missing limb, but we've given them an opportunity to remove themselves from that moment and place themselves in a different moment.
It's called God's country, Big Sky country for a reason.
Delta provides the best access in and out of Montana by far. If folks want to get out, get away, as we say, get lost in Montana, they can have some great experiences.
So this is a very concrete discussion, and we want it to be a concrete discussion for you because we are Montana's #1 airline, and we take that responsibility to you and to the communities we serve very seriously. I have Eric here today. Eric is the Senior Vice President of Domestic Revenue and Pricing at Delta, but it's a wonderful confluence that he grew up on a ranch in Montana and went to college here, and his mother grew up here in this city. So we have appointed Eric. He's in charge of Montana. And so I thought, and he's actually one of the most talented leaders at Delta Airlines. And so I thought that this should be an interactive dialogue, and we'll walk you through where we are. And you know, we owe a responsibility to you because at Delta we have more than just a responsibility of flying airplanes. We have a responsibility to our employees, and we have a responsibility to the communities we serve. And we take those responsibilities seriously, and we understand the importance of air transportation to all of the economies here in Montana and all the cities here in Montana. And we've done quite a good job because I get summoned to the senator's office, about every 4 to 6 months. And he gives me a list of, he actually is the person in charge of route planning, I think, for Montana. And so we have worked very closely with his office. Eric and I probably are in there once every 4 to 6 months. And he has us review all of our service levels, what airplanes, and the like. And we like that. We like that engagement with the leadership of the state because we have to deserve and earn our right to be the #1 airline in Montana. And so with that, a little bit about Delta, and Eric and I are going to work through this together, and then we're going to have time to take your questions, and then we have a series of meetings with different leaders around the state to discuss what's on your mind and how we can do a better job. So Delta started as a crop dusting company in Monroe, Louisiana in the mid-20s and ultimately moved to Atlanta, Georgia in 1943. And actually the founder of our airline was a county extension agent and got involved in aviation to try to deal with boll weevils in the cotton crop in the South in the 20s. So we very much have a rural upbringing, if you will. And over that time, we've grown into the second largest airline in the world, but by passenger count, we carry about 163 million passengers a year. And on peak days, we'll carry 700 to 750,000 people a day with 10,000 flights a day and fly to pretty much every big city in the world with a fleet of about 1,300 airplanes and 80,000 employees worldwide. But we are a company that's founded on values because we believe at Delta that if we stick to the core of what our values are, which are basic American values of honesty, integrity, trust, and commitment to our customers, commitment to our employees, and commitment to our shareholders, we'll be successful. So when you think about Delta and the triangle of Delta, our triangle is a fairly simple triangle. If we take care of our employees will take care of our customers. And if our employees and customers are satisfied, our shareholders will have strong returns. And so that's the core of who we are as an airline. And if you look at operating statistics, financial performance, customer acceptance surveys, we've really topped the global industry. And it's been a remarkable journey for the Delta people. And Eric has provided great leadership with those core, those good values you learned growing up on a ranch in Montana, typify what we are at Delta. So, Eric?
Thanks, Richard. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. Any chance I get to get back to the state, I jump at. So thank you, Senator Baucus and staff, for the opportunity to be here. Obviously, Delta, under different names, has been in the state of Montana since going back to 1928. You can trace it back, our lineage, back to National Parks Airways that used to run mail routes out of Salt Lake City up through Pocatello and Helena and Great Falls and then head back. So under various names, then Delta has been a fixture in the state of Montana. And like Richard said, that's a obligation or responsibility that we take very seriously. So you can't have an economic summit without a economic slide. So this is our, you can see from the slide like this, and what this does is trace the industry passengers into the state and comparing it then to Montana's gross domestic product, its output. And you can see that there's a very high correlation between the passengers that the industry carries into the state and from the state with GDP and how that's progressed over the years from 2001. And it's, obviously Montana has a great reliance on tourism, but we go beyond that as well, and recognize that business is also very important, especially to the various, the 8 communities that we serve here in Montana.
So when you think about air service and its link to the economy, I was speaking to the governor right before this, there's probably no more direct link, particularly as it relates to tourism, and you all know this, than air transportation and the quality of the air transportation into and out of the state. It's just a key driver. And when we look at the growth of air transportation, it tends to track GDP. So when we think about how we plan capacity at Delta, not just in Montana, but in Europe and in Latin America and in Asia, air transportation and the capacity planning that we do at Delta, we always say that we'll take an economic forecast and we will plan our capacity growth to be 10 to 15 percentage points below what the GDP growth of a region or an economy is going to be over the long run. And so growth in the overall economy, and while it's both cause and effect, more air transportation will help grow an economy, but an economy will also help grow more air transportation.
And I think that's a great point, because to that end, if you look back at passenger trends in the state of Montana, even going back to 1980, one interesting correlation that I always look at from a stats perspective is what percent of the population of a state is traveling. And if you go back to 1980, the way that I think about it is that 1 out of every 1,150 Montanans had access or flew on an airline. Progress that through to 2012, and that number goes from 1 in 1,150 to 1 in 360. And so the prevalence then of air travel, more options, more service, increases the amount of access then that Montanans have to air travel, which then allows the GDP to continue to grow. So they track each other very closely, and we watch those trends very closely.
And if you look at the contribution, I think I've heard the number in Montana of $2 to $3 billion a year of economic activity that's generated as a result of aviation in and out of the state. I think as we think out over the future, there are 2 things obviously that are going to grow aviation in Montana. One is it's such a beautiful state. You really have to think hard about how you market that state around the world, not just in the U.S., to Senator Baucus's point, because it is a destination. And it's a destination in both the summer and in the winter. And so the extent to which you continue to grow the marketing dollars and the marketing efforts for the state, it really is a destination. And we can work closely with the state because we do understand distribution channels around the world for air transportation, particularly in the specialty markets, which are travel and tourism to destinations like Montana. And then the second is business travel, and you're at about an 85% tourism, 15% business. That business component needs to grow. And the business component grows as a result of all the things you do in your state for economic development. And that's an important one. And what we try to do at Delta is make it very convenient for business travelers that live here. You saw some on the video. People that live here, that travel to other places, or people that are traveling into Montana because it's a really good place to do business. And, it's getting more and more competitive. I'm incoming chair of the Metropolitan Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. And it's really interesting to see how that world of competitiveness even works between states, much less between countries. And so everything you do to make your state more competitive, and oftentimes it's not just tax incentives or the like, it's all of the things that go into the climate of doing business. The example I'll give you is Atlanta just landed a big research center for AT&T Mobile. And one of the reasons why it landed it was the state passed a law protecting intellectual property. And so that didn't cost anything. So one of the things I would encourage you to do is to really closely scrutinize those kinds of things, because you would have never thought that 400 high-tech jobs would, in part, come to a city because its state legislature passed very strong intellectual property laws, right? So think about how you both grow tourism and grow the business aspects, because this is a wonderful place to live with incredibly high quality of life, incredibly good education, both primary, secondary, and at the college level. And so as you can think about more ways that you make it more business friendly and really marketing the state, we'll see higher growth levels in aviation.
And I think, to Richard's point too, in terms of ease of getting to and from Montana, then we focus a lot on the various access points that Montana has onto the Delta network. So one of the things, obviously, there's been the historic kind of routes from Salt Lake City, from Minneapolis. But what we've done over the last years is grow service from Atlanta. So back in 2005, we put the first nonstop flight from Atlanta into Bozeman. And it was around tourism, so you base it around your peak tourism dates. So it operated in the winter and then in the summer. But what happens is that you slowly then just kind of progress through various hubs. And so this coming summer, so the summer of 2014, based on how well that market has done, Atlanta-Bozeman will fly daily instead of just flying a few times a week. That's a great, great step. And also along those lines, we've added then cities for nonstop service from Atlanta. So this past summer, we flew Atlanta-Missoula nonstop. We were very pleased with how that did. We fly Atlanta-Kalispell nonstop during the summer. And then next summer also, we'll be adding Atlanta-Billings with a nonstop flight. And so it'll be on Saturdays, again, geared to tourism, but it's that first step that you take towards increasing service. And so as it pertains to Billings, we see a lot of opportunity there, especially for the eastern side of Montana with the Bakken oil field and the kind of reliant services that are provided there from a consulting perspective. Business is very big, obviously, in Billings. So we're excited about the prospects there. And again, it's just a continued step towards, thinking about service into Montana. And then one also that we're thinking about then is New York. So is there an opportunity for JFK then nonstop into Atlanta? Again, providing additional access points into the state, especially for global and international business. I think that that's also one of the points that we need to focus on, is less reliance solely on domestic, but moving towards international. I think there's opportunity there as well.
And the reason for that is when you think about where the exports are for Montana, the exports for Montana are agricultural wheat. Much of that wheat flows probably up through the northwestern ports, probably Portland. And so a significant amount of commodity export to Asia and China. And so 50% of all your commodities are exported to Asia. And that's an important link. And that important link over time is what we need to be able to provide so that you have both the passenger linkage to support the key exports from Montana in a global marketplace. Because more and more, when you think about how the world economy has evolved, think back 60 years ago to where we are today, a lot of really big macro developments. One, we have a trustworthy international banking system where you can move money around and you can be relatively secure as a global corporation. And, 60 years ago, it was much more difficult. Second, you have many more free trade agreements. Third, the rule of law applies much more so in many economies around the world where companies become comfortable operating around the world. So as a result, capital flows freely with free trade agreements, a good banking system, and a stronger and stronger sense of a rule of law around the world. So countries like Brazil and China and Russia, India, Africa, continue to be important places where we all do business. And you may be thinking, okay, how do we ever get a foothold in places like that? But you really can't think of it that way, because you're really planting seed corn for subsequent generations when you begin the work to develop those relationships, even if they start out small. So what Delta owes to you are those links internationally to economies around the world that will be economies, candidly, that are going to grow faster than our economy over the long term. That's a hard thing for all of us to say, but it's a reality we should approach in the way we do business.
So the other thing too, then, to that point, is we flew LA Bozeman, which is was an interesting step for us to take this past summer. But again, that market did really well for us too, and it's again kind of this West Coast presence that provides access then to Asia. And so we do see that as a real opportunity looking forward. And LA Bozeman worked very well for us this summer as well. So again, this progression is important. The relationships, the partnerships that we foster as an airline with Billings, with Bozeman, with Missoula, Kalispell, Great Falls, Helena, those all pay dividends down the road. And so then that's how I'm tasked with kind of meeting with various folks about service levels and talking about what we're doing in the state.
Okay, I'm going to go off script. Eric, what's your next best ad? This is always a question when you have my job and you have smart guys like him that work for you, and you've got airplanes and you're wondering how you're going to grow your business. What's your next best ad in Montana?
Well, I always had Atlanta Billings on the list, so we got that in for next summer. So that's exciting. Atlanta Bozeman to go daily was always a goal. So that's a great progression from 2005 to now. And I think then you'd think New York. So,
LaGuardia is outside the perimeter rule.
So you'd go JFK.
JFK
Bozeman is, something that we're thinking about.
So Eric, if you looked, this is what the senator was always on me about. He was always on me about the level of air service today in Montana. The number of seats a year ago was lower than where it was in 2007 prior to the merger.
Mm-hmm.
So what has seat growth been? What has frequency been? And where do you think that trend is going?
If you look at where we're at today, even just compared to last year, so for the fall. So we've come out of peak tourism season. We're in the fall. So now we're serving all of our markets just through Minneapolis and Salt Lake until we get to winter. So we're up about 9% over where we were last fall. So that's increased number of frequencies, but also continuing to increase the gauge into the markets. If you look back to how many flights we've added since 2007, then you're talking about growth rates that are, pretty big, north of probably 15%. So outpacing then what we've seen for GDP. Even though overall as an airline, we keep them very closely tied, some markets do better. And we watch the financial performance of those markets and then add accordingly. If you look then at what we're going to do next summer compared to what we've done this summer, then you'll see an increase in seats of about 10%. So again, it's this kind of like stepping through methodically, adding service to cities and continuing to increase gauge. So,
well, let me ask you a very I didn't tell Eric ahead of time this was going to turn into me asking him questions. But lucky for you, you only have 5 minutes of questions for me.
Okay.
So talk about the controversy around airfares.
Okay.
All right, let's be. People always say, well, it costs more to do this, less to do that. And let me just put one caveat in that. Do you remember what you paid for a gallon of unleaded gas in the year 2000? Does anybody here remember what they paid for a gallon of unleaded gas in 2000 to put in their car? $1. What do you pay today? $4. Same thing for airplanes. So in 2000, we were paying 60 cents a gallon for jet fuel. And Delta uses 3 billion gallons of jet fuel a year. So we're the single largest user of jet fuel in the U.S. We buy $12 billion of jet fuel. In 3Q of this year, in this current quarter, instead of paying 60 cents, we're paying between $3 and $3.05 a gallon into the airplane. So when you think about the importance of what we're doing in the Bakken and what we need to do, a lot of when we talk about pricing, you've got to reflect on where fuel prices have gone in this country and the effect that it's had on the economy. So why don't you try to...
So whenever you talk airline pricing, it can get a little bit, difficult, and I recognize that. It's a challenging topic, just in terms of how you set the fares, but then also the relationship that you have then with the customer and those airfares. And so we do consider cost of production greatly in the fares that we set. And so if you think about domestically getting a passenger from point A to point B, so this includes not just nonstop flights, but connecting, it costs us about $185, $190 to generate that seat, to get a passenger from point A to point B. So fares have to follow that trend. So as it pertains to Montana, then the costs get a little bit higher actually because of, the distance from Montana to most places is greater. So taking that into account, but also the importance of keeping the kind of fares in relation to each other. One thing that's really interesting about Montana is we are a driving culture. We will drive very great distances for differences in price, $5, $10. So you have to keep Bozeman pretty close to Billings. You have to keep Bozeman pretty close to Butte. Butte has to stay close to Helena. Helena has to stay close to Missoula. Missoula has to stay close to Kalispell. So you've got this whole network then of how we think about fares between the different cities. So, and it's not just for local passengers. So local passengers go to Salt Lake or Minneapolis, but then connecting beyond. Going on to Washington, D.C., Boston, the business centers in the Northeast, or even the industrial cities in the Midwest. So we're always watching very closely what the relationship is between leisure fares and business fares. They can't get too far out of whack with each other, but recognizing that cost of production has escalated significantly over the years, to Richard's point.
What about real airfares adjusted for inflation over the last 10 years,
Yeah,
including those loved bag fees?
So even when you include the fees of the various aspects, it's a downward slope. From what passengers paid years ago to what they pay now. So when you adjust it for inflation, airfares over the long term have come down. So that's another challenge, and then it forces us to think about how we do business as an airline. One item too is just looking at the average fares, even without inflation, the current levels of fares are at the same level they were in 2007. But fuel prices are different now than they were in 2007. So that's always the challenge.
So real quick, let me give you a quick fleet update. Delta is doing something very interesting that's unusual in the industry right now, which is the 50-seat regional jet, because of the fuel price phenomena, has become uneconomic. So you over time are going to see more and more much larger airplanes in Montana. There is still, we're going to get our 50-seat fleet down from almost 600 to about 100. And we're in the process of adding about 300 big airplanes. And when fuel prices go up the way they've gone up, the machine has to be more efficient. So you're going to see big upgauging across the network in Montana. Lastly, I just don't want to miss just one really quick point, which is we are investing in all the communities in Montana, and Eric is in charge of that. We realize that we have more than just flights, that we have an obligation to our employees and to the people that we serve to invest in the communities that have been so good to us for over 80 years. So with that, are we going to have questions, or are we done? We have questions? We're done.
You asked them all.
I asked them all. I asked you. They didn't ask us. In closing, I want to thank the senator. If I were going to give you one tip, don't let him retire. Thank you.